quite what I had expected. A Datura trip report, posted by Barton to earwid.org, May 5th, 2010. I had recently procured 500 Datura metal seeds after randomly noticing them being sold on a botanical website for £3, coming free with 80 Morning Glory seeds, which I'd tried before and had the utmost good time on. I remembered reading about Datura on a page about psychedelics and what the word hallucination actually means. I've always been interested in psychonaut activities, I know it's not a word, and this indeed did sound like an experience I had to have. I've been experimenting with drugs and more recently entheogens since I was about 14. I've tried alcohol, cannabis, ecstasy, piperazines, mephedrone, temazepam, beta blockers, salvia 20x, nutmeg, cocaine, speed, tramadol, morphine sulfate, morning glory seeds, butylon, methalon, DXM, and multiple others that I can't recall at this time. After some healthy research and reading a lot of insane reports, Datura reports being quite a hobby of mine for a few days, I decided to buy the 500 seeds. They came 2 days later, on Friday. There was a small party that night, and I planned on keeping the seeds for an occasion where I had nothing at all to do for 3 days. That plan soon changed, when my friend Cal came over to my house for a little pre-booze before the party. I showed him the seeds and told him about a few trip reports and the history of usage. He wanted to dive in and try them. I warned him over and over that he probably shouldn't, seeing as he hadn't tried any psychedelics before, besides weed if you want to count it, and that this was very powerful stuff. He was having a party the next night for his birthday, and I thought he might not manage. But despite my warning, he took 10 seeds, and I wasn't going to let him do them alone, so I had 10 as well. Cal had no anxiety at this point, as he had not read the terrifying reports I had read. I was anxious, worried when and if they would kick in. So let's call this point of first ingestion 0 hours, about 6:30 PM. My timescale may be a bit messed up, and a lot of the night is probably lost in my memory. We were in my room, my parents are fine with us drinking etc, as long as we don't go mad. It was quite a big room, 5.1 speakers, and most people sitting on the 2 beds or the PC chairs. T plus 0 hours. 10 seeds ingested on a half-empty stomach, followed by a line of mephedrone which I thought would probably take the edge off. I knew now that this would not be the psychonautic chill-out session I had hoped to have on Datura. T plus 30 minutes. My friend Yu came over to join the pre-booze. We recently procured him his first ever ecstasy tablet, which he asked me to halve for him to try out. He ate it, and then we suggested he tripped with us. He agreed half-heartedly, and we gave him 10. T plus 1 hour. Cal was growing impatient by now. This was typical behaviour. Like 2 years ago when we first tried ecstasy, it happened to be very strong, and after 20 minutes Cal got bored of waiting and ate too. I joined him, and whoosh. He asked for more. I gave him another 5 seeds and told him to take it easy, and had another 5 myself, as did you. We were still drinking steadily at this point, about 5 units down, and at about this time, the rest of my friends came over. A friend, let's call him Paul, pulled out an ecstasy pill and cut it up, giving me a line. At this point I feel anxious about the Datura, as I was not expecting to try it. I gave Cal and Ewan some more, because they were impatient despite my warnings. I waited a bit longer. Cal started to say the seeds were fake. He was annoying me at this point. "Are you sure?" I said. "Here's more then. Dig in." The faster he got there, the sooner he'd shut up, I guess. T plus 2 hours. Ingested about 25 of the seeds by this point. Wasn't feeling much though. Mildly confused and just a bit all over the place. Trying to keep things under control which don't even need to be in control. By this point I had about 10 units of alcohol, and I decided to cut some more lines of mephedrone for us all. I cut some small lines just as a little boost at this point. I see no point in taking massive lines and wanting more like some fiend. I decided to count the Morning Glory seeds I got free with the Datura. There were 90 of them. Not enough for anything worthwhile, I thought. So Paul and myself decided to down half each just for the sake of it. T plus 2 hours and 30 minutes. I started to notice my mouth feeling very, very dry. This isn't a usual thing with mephedrone, I thought. I kept drinking booze and water, but it didn't help at all. Cal and Ewan did not feel the dry mouth. T plus 3 hours and 30 minutes. We arrived at my friend's party in her flat. The dry mouth was still there, but easily ignored. I was social easily enough. I spent some time walking about rooms talking to people. Very right-minded, but still anxious and a tad distracted because my current love interest seemed to be in a bad mood. Lots of people were very interested in the seeds. They found it hard to believe that these tiny seeds could provide a powerful trip. My friend Chris wanted to try them, so I gave him 50 flat out. I first tried morning glory seeds with this boy and Paul. He doesn't like mephedrone or stimulants in general, so I thought he'd appreciate it. Cal kept asking for more, and I gave him them. Meanwhile, Yu was content on his pill, so we left him to it. T plus 4 hours and 30 minutes. Around about this time, Cal took a drawer off and passed me an invisible cigarette. Of course, I had read about this in other reports, that finally it had kicked in. I had not mentioned the phantom cigarette phenomenon to Cal before, nor had he read about it. This is also surprising because he doesn't smoke. The seeds weren't fake at all. I told him he'd passed me nothingness, and he said, "No, I must have dropped it." More from Cal later. In this hour, I drank up about 15 units, had another few lines of pill and mephedrone, and ate about 30 more seeds. A friend was rolling a joint, and he prompted me to put some seeds in. I had 500, so I thought, fuck it, why not? We smoked it, and we all decided it tasted like burning oak wood. Not much to say at this point. I'm too used to being drunk and full of mephedrone and pills to describe my thought process as anything other than buzzing. I was dancing about the rooms talking to people, smoking, drinking, snorting and swallowing. I was certainly more disorientated than usual though. After this point in time, everything becomes too distorted and events are hard to put in order, but I will try my best. If you're reading and getting bored, the trip is still to come. T plus 5 hours and 30 minutes. It was around this point that Chris and I took the rest of the seeds. Cal had about 150, I would think. There was about 180 left, again I would think. A good sized pile anyway. So we had about 90, just because we were bored of waiting, and I had picked up the courage from all the alcohol and powder. We swallowed the lot. About half an hour I stood up and had no balance whatsoever. It was like the two from Fear and Loathing after Ether, like being very drunk, but I felt right-minded. After a while I think I regained balance. I remember doing handstands and cartwheels. Talking to Chris in the kitchen, his whole face turned into a big blur while I was up close. I realised a massive intake in a short period had worked well. When I closed my eyes, I could see vibrant dark purples and greens everywhere. T plus 7 hours and 30 minutes. These 2 hours are a blur. My friends say that myself and Cal were both talking to ourselves and making very little sense. It was like dreaming while awake. I remember a group of us getting down to our underwear and dancing on a bed to a circus type song and a video of a naked man in a horse head, dancing while cooking mushrooms. Everyone's face was a big blur up close by now. My friends also say I was talking away to a kitchen knife. Eventually around this time, Cal broke a few glasses in a vase. The flat owner got very angry and started kicking people out. I had planned to stay there that night, but Paul's girlfriend Rack let me stay at her house. It was a long walk, and apparently I was quite a burden. I thought there were several other people with myself and Paul as we walked to Rack's house, including Rack herself. I kept stopping to wait on them. I was picking up litter off the ground, random bus tickets, etc., thinking that there were bags full of cocaine and mephedrone and sometimes money. Paul tried to stop me, but I was fascinated with all the things the ground had to offer. Back at Rack's house, Rack found it hard to get me in bed because I was walking about her room intrigued. Paul said that I said something like, "I'm trying to figure out what to do next." And I kept standing back up after lying down. I began to see these electric bat-like, horizontal lightning flashes that were flying around the room when Rack turned the light off. Eventually, Rack had to tuck me in bed. T plus 11 hours ? This is when I vaguely start to remember things again. When I started to wake up, if I was awake at all, and I'm very unsure about the timing, Rack's carpet, which I was sleeping on, had triangular designs on it. The triangles were ranging from white to yellow, and the texture seemed to mimic that of mephedrone powder. So I realistically thought I was cutting lines up, but I found it very hard to tell which triangle was the mephedrone, if at all. I soon realised how silly I was trying to cut lines on a carpet. The triangles made up bigger and bigger triangles, and I kept attempting to pick up these 2D triangles. I kept hearing Paul, who was in the same room sleeping, talking out loud. I also thought that you had come back with us and was in the room, and I had conversations with them and kept saying, "What?" when I misheard, quickly realising that no one was even talking. This is when it started to peak. A few months ago, Paul threw an alien baby, sticky silicone like toy alien, onto the ceiling where it's been stuck there ever since. This alien baby turned into a massive centipede, about 10 centimetres by 4 centimetres. I didn't know it was the alien baby at first. The centipede started crawling towards Rack's bed where she was sleeping with Paul. I was tempted to wake them up, as I did not want to go back to sleep with this massive fucker crawling about. It seemed perfectly normal at the time that this was happening. Then, 4 spiders appeared, one at each side of the centipede, and all 5 insects were now on a spider web. The spiders engaged the centipede in an epic battle. Lots of tactics were used, but eventually the centipede won. I found myself cheering him on as well. He had taken over the spider web, and at this point the centipede revealed itself as the alien baby, still moving along the spider web, eating each of the spiders in turn. Every time he moved, he would bleed from the head, and at one point, he actually winked at me. When Rack was awake, I said something like, "Did you know your alien baby is still alive? He lives off the dead spiders on his ceiling." Now you've got to know that Rack and Paul weren't too fussed about me tripping on the floor. I'm a bit upset because I kept them awake with my nonsense occasionally, but there was no real bad vibes. I actually did consider at the time that alien babies were living silicon-based life forms. The fact that Rack couldn't see and move meant little to me at the time, and after a while I found myself talking to someone on the phone, to open my eyes to see that my phone was not actually in my hand at all. T plus 13 hours. After chilling for some time, I left home to sleep, and go through the process of feeling like shit for a while before going back out that night. However, I wasn't aware that I'd still be tripping. I walked to the train station. I felt as if my friends were around me all the time. It was like dreaming while awake. Things and people would be there and then disappear. I realised when I pulled my phone out that I could not read anything up close. In fact, my whole phone had changed. The cover had several differences to it. Weird additions that I could see but could not feel. The language had changed, and all my contacts were spelled differently, or had random words added to them. When I got to the station, there were a number of people around, most noticeably a man standing under a lamppost with a clock attached to it. He was very tall. He said something that I couldn't hear, and I said very loudly, "What?" And he disappeared along with 2 others behind him. I felt bad how I've not been able to engage with these random made-up characters like others have been able to. I felt like I should be embarrassed about looking like an idiot talking to myself, but I barely cared at this point. The area behind where the tall man was standing was a train station toilet, but I remembered later on that this train station doesn't have a toilet, or a clock for that matter. When the train came, I got on and showed my pass to the ticket examiner, or maybe I showed it to no one. Looked out the window for a bit, and suddenly all the seats, 5 or 6, were filled with people from my school which I left last year. I don't remember the chats we were engaging in, but I remember not wanting to talk to them and looking out the window occasionally to avoid eye contact. At one point when I did so, I turned back to see that they were all gone, and I had been talking to myself again. I turned round to see that none of the people, or possibly imaginary people, behind me were looking at me at all. I found none of this scary or unpleasant though. I approach all things with an open mind and see no point in trying to fight the effects of anything I put in my body. After the 10-minute train journey and a 2-minute walk to my house, I was finally home. I don't remember if I talked to my mother when I came in, or anyone for that matter, but I quickly went upstairs. The next 7 hours I spent in my house prior to going out again was spent in confusion. I definitely had a shower, but I've no recollection of it whatsoever. I turned on my computer and was on Facebook. I realised how hard it was to type. Here is a post from 4 PM. People keep coming in to then they gradually disappear. Every few minutes I hear whisper and turn around to see Nist rubbed and sipped. Occasionally I catch them out and to say, "True enough, pretty sure some sort of thing in the corner is throwing bits of paper at me, but I can find the pieces. Keep thinking I see might as well." And then 15 minutes later, some cunt shining a torch around occasionally. I have a shit one X. I was trying to explain that my friends from last night kept coming into my room and I could hear them talking around me. I would turn around and they'd disappear, or sometimes I would catch them out and they'd have to stay until I looked away again. Bits of paper kept landing on me or flying past me. Something invisible was throwing them at me, but I couldn't find the paper lying around me, so I knew it wasn't actually happening. Not sure if this was before or after the paper, but I remembered a few days after the experience that I was using Facebook on my mobile. This is possible, but why I would ever do that on my shit phone is beyond me. I was probably confusing my laptop with my phone in the dream limbo. I remember looking on the floor to see a small maggot squirming on my carpet. I still don't know if it was real or not, but it is plausible. I remember thinking, shit, I really need to detox my room somehow. This is a disgusting state of affairs. I've never had to deal with a maggot before, but my first instinct was to kill it while picking it up with a pen and then putting it in the bin. And so I did. The pen didn't work, but I used a pencil. I was confused about what I was doing socially that night. The last 2 nights, Thursday and Friday, involved going to the same flat. I assumed for some reason that I was having people round for another pre-booze before going to the same flat, then to Cal's 19th birthday party, but only the latter was true. I sent a wide range of undecipherable texts that my friends and I laughed about later. Cal kept coming into my room. I was expecting him to be coming round. He wasn't really, I just imagined he was. I was angry because if he was to really show up, how could I distinguish him from his clone illusions? Whenever I was to be called, the name on the phone, for example, Annie Rosetta McCormick is calling, would never correspond to who was actually calling me. Some of the names that appeared to be calling, I realised later I didn't even know, or I've never had their number. This resulted in some embarrassing phone conversations with drug dealers and phone calls which I wrongly deemed to be pranks. I actually thought my phone was broken until late Sunday afternoon when I recharged my phone and realised my silliness. Around this time in my house, I was also smoking imaginary cigarettes, remembering I had it in my hand while resting it against my lap, and quickly jumping trying to avoid the burning. I quickly realised that I had no cigarettes at all, but there were ghostly memories there of lighting up and the taste being in my mouth. Truly bizarre. Somehow I had managed to get a plan. I was to get the next train to meet my friends in a park before going to the usual flat owned by Anna. And, well, I assumed that was what was happening in my still Datura-induced haze. I noticed before I left my house that my computer desk had several rainbow-tinted drops of water on it. When I touched these bits of water, my hand would go right through them. They would not move and I could not feel them at all. I experimented with them for a bit, and discovered the only way to get rid of them was by flicking them with my finger. However, some of them would not be moved by this process. I had 10 minutes till the train. I came to the conclusion that they were germs, and my room must be filthy. Maggots and massive germs. I started to realise that these germs were reproducing through mitosis right before my eyes, rapidly taking over the desk. What an amazing thing to behold without a microscope, I thought. Now I had 10 minutes to the train. If I left, I would most certainly come home the next day to realise that my room had been taken over by these germs. I had to destroy them, I realised. I went down and grabbed a cloth, bathroom spray, and a bowl of warm water, and started scrubbing at the ghostly dots. Some would just not go away, and I realised the next day that the ones which would not go away were actually little chips taken out in my desk, and the ones that did move were probably just crumbs or something of the sort. The rest of the day and night consisted of basic confusion of what I was doing, and my perception of my phone still being a bit off. Later on, I got very drunk and stoned at Cal's party, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in a park 20 odd miles away from Cal's house at 2 PM with 2 backpacks, one filled with spices including nutmeg. I had hazy recollections of walking through fields and around lakes attempting to hitchhike. I'm not sure if I can blame Datura for this, but it's not as if I'm not used to this kind of thing happening. By then, my vision was normal. Looking back, I'm glad I had the experience, though I wish Cal hadn't tempted me to try it on this one occasion. It is definitely a weekend to remember, and I would rate it as a positive experience. But I would only recommend it to those who have a high level of self-awareness, and I urge people to keep an open mind while trying Datura. This experience happened last weekend, 5th of March 2010, and since then I've tried lower doses of Datura on the 11th and 12th. On the 11th, the effects came on quicker. No hallucinations this time, just confusion and mild anticipation, perhaps a slightly higher level of thought. massive pupils were also evident, and I felt really tired. I smoked some weed as well, and slept for 16 hours, which was very refreshing. The next morning, I made a tea out of 50 seeds, which put me in a mild state of delirium for the full day. By Saturday morning, I had amazing closed-eye visuals and felt very euphoric. I have noticed since Friday that I can remember so many more of my dreams in finer detail, and the dreams seem to mean more to me. I've been lucky to not have a bad trip with any hallucinogens so far, and I'm looking forward to trying more in the future, and perhaps Datura again one day. Yeah, talk about lucky. I think anybody else would have taken these seeds and had a seriously nightmarish experience, but I feel like perhaps the fact that he mixed it with booze, methadone, and I think he had a bit of an ecstasy pill, probably took away from the nightmarish, disturbing delirium that most people experience when they take Datura. I do think it would have gone very differently if him and his mates had just completely consumed the Datura seeds by themselves. Oh, and he also had the Morning Glory as well, so he was under so many different mixtures that it probably mitigated some of the disturbing effects that most other people experience when they take this plant. So yeah, it was quite an in-depth report, to be fair, but it's also a hallmark in why you shouldn't abuse these chemicals in the way this guy did. No judgment to this guy whatsoever. I mean, he sounds quite young. I don't know, it might be. Yeah, it does sound quite young. He's partying with his mates. It's normal to experiment when you're younger, but you should definitely show a bit of restraint when it comes to these insanely intense mind-altering chemicals. The fact that he read all these bizarre, terrifying reports and was still up for doing it shows that I guess he sort of has a slightly good head on him. I mean, he definitely is open-minded if he's up for the experience, and like he says, he tries not to let the experience get too much of a hold on him. He just takes it as it is and accepts whatever is happening. But still, the way he went about it, just consuming so many different chemicals at once and just hoping for the best, it was sort of hedonistic in that sense. Again, I'm just describing how it is from my perspective. Absolutely no judgment at all. We've all been through it, haven't we? And yeah, when you're young, experimentation is very appealing. So yeah, it's just one of them, isn't it? Really, can't really give him too much shit for that. Just glad that it went well and he wasn't running around throwing knives at people and undressing himself and try to eat his own hands or some other mental shit that can occur when you're on Datura. He definitely did pretty well in that regard. I'm interested to see what actually happened to his other mates. I thought he would have gone into that and said about their experience, because I imagine it might have gone much differently, considering one of the guys had barely ever taken a psychedelic before other than weed. So yeah, going from that to Datura is pretty extreme, to be honest. So yeah, I'm glad it went okay for him in the end, but he does sound a bit overboard with his consumption of mind-altering chemicals. Probably wouldn't recommend this at all for other people. When I do these Datura reports, it's no advocation at all for you guys to do this. I mean, that's why I put the disclaimer at the beginning. Obviously, it can be used in a spiritual fashion. It has been used for centuries. You look in all these other traditions of mixing ayahuasca with Datura in places in South America, Mexico, other areas across the world, and it does have extreme beneficial properties to it. But when you're just some young dumb lad in the UK who wants to get off his head in some flat party, then the context there is a lot different, and plant psychedelics can often mess with you if you misuse them in that manner. That's why a lot of people reckon they have a sort of spirit to it, a personality, and if you mess with that personality, then it's gonna bite you in the ass big time via karma. So yeah, that's often a result of these disturbing Datura experiences. People feel like they're being punished for sort of misusing and abusing the plant. So yeah, if you do plan on using Datura, be very careful. I'd personally just say not to bother. You can have sufficiently profound psychedelic experiences on the safer chemicals like the novel psychedelics. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. Can't stop you. Just remember to be safe and just don't follow in the footsteps of this guy. Really, I'd say just do it yourself. Do it yourself if you're very confident in your own psyche and open-mindedness and accepting nature of whatever may come up. Or even better, do it with a trip sitter and make sure they look after you. But other than that, hope you enjoyed this one. It was pretty chunky Datura report, and we'll see you in the next video.